So it's first really important to acknowledge that there is a lot of disagreements. And one solution that people have come to with all of these disagreements is to kind of just come up with confirmations of how to use Guizhi Tang as a whole. So you have a certain set of symptoms or constitution or pulse or abdomen, and then you use Guizhi Tang to treat that. If we do this, though, we actually are bypassing one of the most important issues. And the issue is what is happening with the yin and wei disharmony. Actually, we can say whatever we want about the original text and what Zhongjing meant and how the herbs work if we don't modify the formula, because we figure out tricks of way of using that formula as a whole. But as soon as we need to modify that formula, different than what Zhongjing said, we actually have to commit to some theoretical understanding. And this is a very important point, because like I said, if you don't change the formula, you don't commit to anything, and then you create sometimes very elaborate stories that you really can't even verify, and they become clinically not that useful, and they're more just a theoretical mind game. So we say, oh, this is just a Guizhi Tang pattern, give Guizhi Tang. So we must just dissect this issue if we're going to expand the formula and expand the text and expand the theory. We commit to some understanding. Let's take an example. I hope you guys understand what I'm talking about after this, because I find it really important. So, sweating. Why do we sweat? This is one of the questions I asked you guys ahead of time. There was a couple answers. For example, one of the answers was the wei is insecure and it allows the yin qi to leak out. Another one was the lung qi wasn't able to regulate the wei qi, and this led to opening of the interstices in the skin, and the yang qi is deficient in the zang fu also. I think these are both reasonable. Why we sweat comes back to our original question. Where is the pathogen? And what does the strength and the protective mean? And is this a deficiency pattern? So one of the first really prominent ideas that people have is that the protective qi is weak. Like that person said, it is unable to hold in the sweat. So protective qi is yang qi, and it loses its ability to close the exterior, and then the sweat spontaneously leaks out. But also, what about this? The strength of the protective qi and deficiency of the nutritive level. This actually goes back to the line in the Shanghan Lun. The first one doesn't really make sense with that line of the Shanghan Lun, yet a lot of people say that. The second one is following that line, and there's a couple ways that works. One is that there is this blockage from a strong pathogen. That means there's a pathogen that's in the protective exterior, and then one of the ideas is the nutritive actually receives that pathogen, and then it steams the nutritive level, and then sweat comes out. Another idea is that the yang qi, there's yang qi constraint. And it means the yang in the surface of the fleshy exterior, because of the pathogen, because of the strength of the protective qi, meaning the pathogen in the protective qi, constrains things. And then there's interior distress of the nutritive yin, and this causes sweating. Or there's just strength in the wei, meaning that there's actually strong wei defensive yang that rises up to meet the pathogen, and the yin is weak and inability to constrain and the interior, and this leads to sweat. There's a lot of different spins on what this means. I hope you get this. And there's a reason why we want to go through all of this. The third, which is a not so common, but a few people talk about this, is a heart constraint. And this is, they say, I think like the sweat is the fluid of the heart, and that any kind of sweat then is related to the heart, and the constraint is what's actually leading to heat, and then the heat is actually somehow creating the sweat. And then a fourth one is the wind actually is not in the protective chi, but the wind actually attacks straight to the nutritive level. And remember that the nutritive chi flows in the vessels, and then the Wei chi flows outside the vessels, and so the vessels become not peaceful, and then this creates a sweat. So we have four ideas that are actually very prominent in Chinese historical literature. And I don't think any of them are right. And none of them are wrong. And it's useful to keep all of these in our mind as we look at patients. It's a very, I think, more evolved way to approach Chinese medicine. And Dinganren, as we'll see in some of the cases, actually very good at using this type of methodology where we don't just latch on to, okay, this is heart constraint, and that's why we have sweating. Again, if you're just giving Guizhi none of this matters anyway. It's a complete, mind game. But when you start to want to change out herbs, for example, if you think that Guizhi is all about the heart and the blood, and it's because it's red, and this is one story, right, that Guizhi is actually, it is the herb used for the sweating because it's opening up the constraint. If this is true, then we could actually use other herbs that open up the heart and should be able to treat the sweating, right? Or is Guizhi actually in Guizhi Tang, is it really working on the defensive qi or the protective qi? Is it promoting defensive yang? Is that how it's working on the sweating? If that's true, then we should also be able to use herbs besides Guizhi that has that same function to deal with the pathology. And this actually is what Qin believes. Is this really a weak protective qi? If it's a weakness of protective qi, how can we strengthen that protective qi? Actually, Huang qi, right? Huang qi, we know, strengthens protective qi. Can we use Huang qi with Guizhi Tang? Well, if that is what we believe, and a lot of people think that Huang qi and Guizhi Tang do not go together. They're totally different mechanisms. But that's probably because they have an idea of how that pathodynamic is working. But that's different than weak protective qi. But if you think that's true, then you should be able to use Huang qi to treat that. So why do we even change out these herbs? Any reason? Anyone have any ideas of why we would want to change out herbs in Guizhi Tang? I know it's kind of sacrilegious in some circles, but a lot of people really think it's important to be able to modify the formulas. Well, one is to make it stronger. Two is to be able to address a wider range of problems. And we're going to really see this clearly with this treatment method. Three is really to just fit that patient's individual presentation really well. They might not fit exactly like a Guizhi Tang. And instead of just kind of fudging it, we can be very specific. But also, what if you're out of an herb? This is one reason I really like starting to think about things like this, because we have a bulk herb pharmacy that many times for months might be out of an herb because we can't get it. So what do? We have to know how to think about these things so we can substitute correctly. And we have to commit to some kind of theory. So for example, you may be not wanting to use Guizhi because this patient has a problem with cinnamon. This had happened to me before. But can you still use Guizhi Tang? Well, maybe you won't call it Guizhi Tang, but you can certainly harmonize the yin and the wei. And actually, Dinganren has cases where he harmonizes the yin and wei without Guizhi, and others without Baishao. So it just takes a little bit larger perspective on what yin and wei disharmony really is. So let's try to commit to something for a while, at least what Dr. Chen and Dr. Wu think is happening with a yin and wei disharmony. So I think someone said this earlier. it is a middle burner qi and yang deficiency. Excuse me. And if we see this on the left here, the middle burner here, the middle qi, is nourishing the nutritive and construction level, this yin level. Okay, and then this yin level is nourishing the fleshy exterior, and then that fleshy exterior is the yin is nourishing the fleshy exterior and the defensive qi. If the defense is strong, the pathogen doesn't come in. So if there is any type of problem with the middle qi being deficient or even blocked, which we'll talk a little bit about, then the yin qi does not go up and nourish the defensive qi, and the pathogen comes in and is stuck at some point, some place in the body. I like to think of the classic analogy, which you all may have heard, is of the troops and the supplies or the food, basically the rations. So you have the troops, which is the defensive qi, and you have the nutritive qi, which is the food. And if you can get the food to the troops, then the Wei qi will be strong. If the food can't get to the troops for any reason, meaning the food's deficient, there's not enough, or the food's pathway is blocked, then you have a yin and Wei disharmony. And then you have a pathogen that can come in and can be on the fleshy exterior, can be in the channels or collaterals or network vessels. And depending on where it lodges will depend on how aggressively you have to treat it and what kind of symptoms you have. And the most important thing that you should try to understand about this is that it can be acute or chronic. So many cases in my clinic of harmonizing yin and Wei are chronic cases. So with this understanding here, you actually can treat quite a wide variety of conditions.